Hi guys, I hope you're doing well. I hope last week went okay for you, the first week back online. I hope this class wasn't too overwhelming. Hope that was pretty manageable for you. As always, let me know if you need anything or if anything is confusing or overwhelming. I'm posting this lecture on Monday, so one day early. Your quiz still won't be due until Wednesday at midnight, but I wanted to give you this lecture a day early because your next test will open up on Wednesday. So wanted to just give you that extra time to get ahead so that you could start studying. I'll post a study guide along with this lecture, so you should be able to start on that study guide now. So without further ado, let's get rolling on chapter 9. This chapter is over stress and health and well-being and happiness. So I think it will be super relevant to you at the current moment. All right, so here's just some basic concepts when we're talking about stress. So when we use the word stress, we often use that word to describe the stressful challenge or the stressful threat. So, I was under a lot of stress. The stress would be under a challenge. But we also use it to describe our reaction to the challenge. So I'm stressed out about it. That's your reaction to the challenge. But stressor is the technical term for that threat or challenge that causes stress. And then stress reaction is the term that we use for how we respond to it. So taking a test, the test is the stressor, and then your anxiety and tight chest and sweaty palms is the stress reaction. So stress can be good, right? There are some positive effects of stress. It can be a good thing whenever it is viewed as short-lived or as a challenge that can be accomplished or overcome. So whenever stress is a good thing, whenever we do view it as short-lived or a challenge that we can overcome, we have a lot of good things that happen. Our immune system mobilizes, it boosts our immune system for healing wounds and fighting off infections, things like that. It's also really good for motivation. If you have no stress and anxiety about anything, you won't be motivated to do a good job, to study, to get better at a task. So a little bit of stress is a good thing if it motivates us to do better. Athletes, entertainers, teachers, they're all under stress and they thrive under that stress because it motivates them to do better and to practice. And stress can also help us practice resilience. It helps us learn how to bounce back and cope if we handle it the right way. So some good things about stress, but there are negative effects. And we typically see more negative effects whenever we view the stress as extreme, too much, or too long. So extreme and prolonged stress can lead to some negative effects. I think my head's in the way of the negative effects and I cannot figure out how to move my head. So that box says that it can lead to diseases and mental illnesses. So, circulatory, digestive, respiratory, infectious diseases, all of these things can be, we can be at an increased risk for if we have extreme and prolonged stress. Same is true for mental illnesses. We see higher rates of depression, anxiety, PTSD if we're under too much stress for too long. So we have some different kinds of stressors. One type of stressor is catastrophes. So this is large-scale disasters, natural disasters, storms, hurricanes, floods, fires, losing your home, that kind of thing. And this can be a big one, right? We see lots of effects of stressors like these. For example, the suicide rate in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina tripled. So lot more depression and suicide. We saw a 58% increase in anxiety after 9/11 happened, that catastrophe that happened, lots of effects on mental illness throughout the community. Another type of stressor is significant life changes, right? So life transitions, going off to college, graduating, starting a new job, moving to a new place, getting a divorce, someone that you love dying, big life transitions like that, which sounds a lot like you guys, where you're at right now. This time in life is full of life changes, full of stress. People, young adults, are much more likely to say that they are currently experiencing stress. So that's a big one that I'm sure is affecting lots of you, especially right now with all of this crazy transition happening. We also see that if we have a cluster of these crises, these life transitions at the same time, then that just kind of compounds on top of itself. So, you know, losing your job and then losing your house and then getting a divorce because of financial strain, all of those things piling on top of each other. Taking care of somebody with Alzheimer's, and then being in a financial crisis because you're taking care of them, just kind of compounding on top of each other. So those big life transitions can be a big one. And not only that, but also these daily hassles, just everyday struggles. Being stuck in traffic, having annoying roommates, long lines at the store, your phone dying. These are all just daily problems that everybody has. But they can really pile up just like those significant life changes do. And also these daily hassles can really be impounded or compounded by prejudice. So, you know, going through life every day thinking that you are going to be disliked or distrusted or be doubted in your competence at tasks, that's stressful. And having something small happen to you can be intensified if you're also struggling with that fear of prejudice going on. Same thing with tough life circumstances. You know, if you don't have reliable childcare, or if you are living paycheck to paycheck, if you have a chronic health concern, these daily struggles like long lines at the store or being stuck in traffic can make a much greater impact on you because you have those other life circumstances going on. It's not just happening in a bubble. So those are the types of stressors. So we'll talk a lot about stress and how it influences our health and illness. So our psychological state has an effect on our physiological state, right? Our mind affects our body. We know that to be true. And stress is something commonly happening in the mind that does play a big role on our body. We see that a strong stress response reduces our ability to fight off diseases because it triggers immune suppression. So our immune system kind of becomes less active whenever we're stressed. It's harder to fight off infection, fight off diseases. It delays surgical wound healing. So our immune system, because it's suppressed, isn't doing as good of a job as it could at healing those wounds. Increases our vulnerability to colds. We see that people who are under a lot of stress are significantly more likely to catch things like this. COVID-19. If you're under a lot of stress, you are more susceptible to diseases like that are spreading. And then we also see a hastened disease course. So once you do catch something, it will act up a lot faster because of that immune system suppression. So stress itself doesn't cause illness. It doesn't create sickness, but it does alter your immune functioning. So if you are exposed to illness, then you're more likely to catch it. Stress does not cause cancer. It doesn't create cancer cells. However, because stress does suppress our immune system, it kind of weakens our body's defenses against cancer's growth. So it doesn't cause cancer, but it might weaken our ability to slow it down. One thing that it really does affect is heart disease, specifically coronary heart disease. This is the closing of the blood vessels that kind of sustain the heart muscle and keep it going, because we see a difference between type A and type B personality in their rates of coronary heart disease. So type A personality, I'm sure you guys probably already know your types, but type A personality is very competitive, very driven, very motivated to do well, very impatient. They can be very verbally aggressive, very easily agitated or angered because of these other things, the competitiveness, the motivation. Get annoyed when people are in the way of succeeding. And then we have type B people who are kind of the opposite of that, right? More laid back, easygoing, go with the flow, less concerned with those kinds of things, more mellow. So obviously, type A personality is under a lot more stress, right? So we see a much higher rate of heart disease in type A people. One study found that about 70% of men that they looked at who had heart attacks were type A, and 0% of men who had heart attacks were true 100% type Bs. So very much of difference in the rates of heart disease if you are this type of person that is under a lot of stress a lot. So it does influence heart disease. Something else that influences the rates of heart disease is this difference between pessimism and optimism. Kind of under the same principle, people who are pessimistic tend to have higher rates of coronary heart disease because they're looking at life through a lens that makes them more stressed. And this other study looked at people who had heart attacks and then tried to help people who were type A having heart attacks kind of shift that lifestyle, shift that way of thinking, bring down that competitiveness, that just that stressful lifestyle, and kind of shift them more to type Bs, more laid back. And when we did that, when we had that intervention and shifted that lifestyle from type A to more type B, we saw a decrease in repeat heart attacks. So something to consider. And then this just kind of shows all the things that we've talked about, all of the effects that stress has on us. So we know that stress doesn't directly cause illness, but it does make us more vulnerable to problems. So stress is unavoidable, right? We can't stop stressors from happening, from interjecting themselves into our lives, but we can learn how to cope with them. That's all we can do. So coping is alleviating stress, whether it be emotionally, cognitively, or behaviorally. We all have different methods for coping, for how we deal with stress. So your book describes two different types of coping: problem-focused coping and emotion-focused coping. So problem-focused coping is an attempt to alleviate stress by tackling the stressor head-on, doing something about the stressor, changing the stressor, changing the way that you interact with the stressor. So when we feel a sense of control over the situation and think that we can change the circumstances or change ourselves, then we might address the stressor directly. So if you are having a fight with a family member and you feel like, you can do something about it, maybe we can make this better, mend this relationship, then you might go to them directly and talk it out. That's problem-focused coping, dealing with the stressor head-on. Emotion-focused coping is what we do when we feel like we don't have control over the situation, when we believe that we can't change the stressor, there's nothing that we can do about it. We do this emotion-focused coping. So if you don't think that you can work through things with your family, you've tried, it didn't work, you really don't feel like there's any change that's going to happen, all that's left to do is tend to your emotional needs. So you're sad, you're defeated, you're annoyed, so you would go to maybe another friend to vent to them and seek affirmation from other people. So you're not doing anything about the stressor. You're not changing yourself, but you're attending to your emotional needs by coping in another way, venting, seeing a therapist, just talking it out to someone, crying, drinking. People used to cope. That's emotion-focused coping. Don't recommend. See a therapist. So one thing that leads to a lot of stress, and we see a higher stress response when there is a perceived loss of control. So feeling like you're not in control increases your stress and escalates all of the negative effects that stress has, like decreasing your immune response in heart problems. For example, in one study, they gave 2 rats an identical shock, and then they gave one rat the opportunity to control that shock by running on a wheel. If you ran on the wheel, then the shock would stop. He has control over the shock. And then the other one didn't have control. And they found that the one that didn't have control, the one that didn't have the ability to run on a wheel to make the shock stop, was much more susceptible to ulcers and disease. Their immune functioning was much lower because they didn't have control over that stressor. The same concept is true for elderly people in nursing homes. Residents who don't have a lot of control over their daily activities decline much faster and die much sooner than those who do have control over their surroundings, their environment, their schedule. Because of that perceived loss of control, adds a lot more stress. This is also a big reason that wealthy people tend to live longer and be less susceptible to disease. Because lots of money means lots of control over your circumstance, over your life, and so there's less stress, less negative consequences of stress. Related to this is this concept of learned helplessness. So learned helplessness is when people are exposed to bad things over and over again that they can't control. They begin to learn that they're helpless, that they can't control the situation, they can't stop it, even if the opportunity ever did someday present itself. One really sad study, did this to dogs, taught dogs learned helplessness. So what they did was they put a dog in a space that had a floor that shocked their feet, and they put a wall up so the dog couldn't leave. So he couldn't control the situation, couldn't stop the shocks. And then slowly they would lower the wall. And they found that even when the wall was completely almost gone, the dog still wouldn't do anything, wouldn't jump over the wall to get away from the shocks because he had learned that he could not control the shocks, that he was helpless in this situation. The same concept is true for battered women. Battered women syndrome is being told and shown over and over again that you can't control this, you can't stop it. So even when the opportunity does present itself, they won't do anything about it because of this perceived loss of control, which, as you imagine, is very stressful and can lead to lots of negative consequences of stress. So what determines our perception of how in control we are? It's our locus of control. Our locus of control is to what extent we believe we have control over our life. So people with an external locus of control feel like what happens to them is kind of up to chance, up to fate. What happens to me is not my doing. I can't control it. It's not up to me. So, I got this job because they happened to need help when I applied. I got fired because my boss has favorites. I failed the test because of the way it was written. Things that happen to me are happening because of fate, because of circumstance, because of luck, because of something that's not related to me. On the opposite hand, we have people with internal locuses of control. So people who feel like their fate is controlled by their own actions. What happens to me is my own doing, is because of what I did. So I got the job because I worked hard. My partner and I broke up because I made the choice to change that. And so we see that people who have this internal locus of control, who feel like their life is controlled by their own actions, they achieve more in school and work. They're more independent. They have better health. They experience less depression and anxiety. So this sense of control over their lives leads to less stress, and then less negative consequences of stress, and better outcomes. Something else that plays a huge role in stress and health is social support. So social support is feeling liked and encouraged by people who care about you, friends and family. And this is a big, big part of our happiness and health. We see that, for example, in one study looking at our immune systems, we see better immune systems in people with larger social supports. Healthy volunteers that were in quarantine, they were all exposed to the same virus, and those who had the most social ties were the least likely to catch a cold. So having people in your life doesn't just affect your happiness, it affects your health too. And then on the opposite side of that is social isolation, which leads to obviously higher loneliness and a higher risk of death. And the risk of death increase for social isolation is equal to that of smoking. So your social support plays a huge role on your health, just as big of a role as does other factors like smoking and high cholesterol and obesity. Social support really matters. So it's funny that, when things are bad for us, when we get depressed and anxious, we tend to spiral into isolation when it's actually the opposite that will make us feel better. And honestly, I imagine that a lot of you guys are going through that right now, feeling trapped in your houses and feeling socially isolated. It's super important to maintain those connections and talk to people, call people on the phone, FaceTime people whenever you start to spiral, because social isolation takes a huge toll on not only your happiness but your health too. Something else that's great for happiness and health is exercise. Okay, there's so many benefits of exercise. Adds to the quality of your life, fights heart disease and reduces heart attack risk. People who exercise regularly have half as many heart attacks. It's a predictor of life satisfaction. It reduces depression and anxiety and lots of other mental illnesses. Because less exercise means less brain activity in areas that are essential for reward and motivation and effective coping. Non-exercisers are twice as likely to report being unhappy. The chemicals in your brain that are released when you exercise are a natural antidepressant. So if you are feeling depressed or feeling anxious, even just 10 minutes of walking every day, 10 minutes walking plays a huge role in changing the neurotransmitters in your brain chemistry. Makes a big difference, more so than any pill could. This study looked at mildly depressed female college students, and they assigned a third of them to each group. So one group did nothing to change the depression, one group practiced relaxation techniques, and then the other group did aerobic exercise regularly. And they saw that the exercise group had a much more significant decrease in depressive symptoms, even beyond that of the relaxation group. So it does play a huge role. You guys should all be getting out and walking. Get out of your house. Something else that can help us reduce stress is meditation and mindfulness meditation. And I've just recently started getting into this and researching it. And I think it can be a really great tool. So mindfulness meditation is kind of relaxing and silently looking inward, thinking about your thoughts, thinking about your breathing, slowing down, because this is really good for anxiety, especially because typically what happens in anxiety is we are either ruminating on what happened in the past or focusing on what's going to happen in the future, but we are never in the present moment. So doing some mindfulness techniques and some grounding techniques can kind of bring you back to the present and help you just kind of monitor your thoughts and your feelings and control them a little bit better. So one kind of grounding mindfulness technique that I like to give is the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 technique. I don't know if any of you guys have heard of it or used it, but just taking a step back and thinking about 5 things that you can see, 4 things that you can feel, 3 things that you can hear, 2 things that you can smell, and 1 thing that you can taste. And if you slow down and just kind of pay attention to your sensations around you, kind of pulls you back into the present moment to get through anxious feelings and kind of redirect you away from them and more towards the present moment. We see lots of great effects like improving sleep, better interpersonal relationships, improved immune system functioning, just less stress. Honestly, give it a shot. I thought it sounded kind of lame, and then I tried it, and it makes a huge difference. Do it before you go to bed, if you're having trouble going to sleep, all kinds of uses. Something that is important to mention about happiness is money, right? How does money and wealth affect our happiness? Well, it is true that people in rich countries are happier than people in poor countries. However, the power to increase happiness is strongest at low incomes. And that makes sense, right? So if I give $1,000 to a person in poverty, that's going to affect their happiness a lot more than someone in the middle class or a millionaire getting $1,000, right? If you were handed $1,000 today, you would be so much happier than Bill Gates would be if he was handed $1,000. So we can change happiness with money for people with low incomes. That's true. However, once we have enough money to be comfortable and secure and have control over our lives, then getting more money doesn't make as big of an impact on our happiness. I read a study one time that said something along the lines of like money can buy happiness up to like 75,000 a year or something like that, and then after that you're already comfortable, secure, have control over your life, you're happy. More money doesn't really add to it as much. Also, we know that economic growth in affluent countries does not boost morale or social well-being. So just because you live in a rich country that's getting richer, that's doing well economically, does not mean that your happiness will get any better. Our happiness individually depends on a couple of things. So we compare our happiness to our past selves and to the people around us. So this term, adaptation level phenomenon, refers to how we judge our circumstances based on what we've previously been experiencing. So if you've been depressed for a long time and then somebody does something nice for you, just something small happens, that can make you super happy because your baseline's been down here, and now just this one little thing makes you feel very happy. However, on the opposite end of that, if you've been just in heaven for a week, so you've been living the life, been doing great, and your baseline's been up here, and then something bad happens, like you stub your toe or you have a disagreement, then you might feel super unhappy because we are comparing our happiness to what we've been used to previously experiencing lately. Another thing that we compare our happiness to is the success of other people, right? So the sense, this relative deprivation is the sense that we are worse off than others that we compare ourselves to. So when you compare yourselves to people doing worse than you feel happier, right? True. You're doing better than them. Relative to them, I'm doing okay. But we're usually comparing ourselves to people doing roughly the same or better than us. That's why when you get a promotion, it doesn't necessarily make you happier, because you used to be comparing yourself to people the same as you. And then you got a promotion, you're better than them, great, happy for a second. But then you get used to comparing yourself to the people on that new level, or people one step higher than you, that you feel like you have been deprived relative to those people above you, feel like you are less happy because you are not doing as well as them. So we compare our happiness to what we've been experiencing and to the happiness and success of other people. Those are two things that influence how we perceive our own happiness. So this is kind of a list of researched variables that do influence our happiness and don't influence our happiness. So I just wanted to point this out to say that some things that aren't related to happiness is age, gender, and physical attractiveness. So it's not true that old people are less happy. It's not true that women are more happy necessarily. And it's not true that being an attractive person physically is going to make you more happy. The things that do matter and do influence happiness is high self-esteem, optimism, close relationships with other people, sleep, and exercise. So you can control all of those things. What you can't control is your age, gender, and physical attractiveness, but good thing those don't influence your happiness. You are in control of that. Okay, so that's all I've got for you today. The quiz for this lecture is due by Wednesday at midnight, and your your second exam will be posted Wednesday morning, and you will have until Sunday night at midnight to complete that second exam. Feel free to use your resources. You've got them now. So I hope you all do really well on the second test. I wish you good luck. Shoot me an email if you have any questions about any of the items on this study guide. I'd be happy to help. See you guys next week.